going to talk today about the Plata Latina strategy and the geologic concepts behind it, and the discovery that we have made with these concepts and strategies. Okay, the Plata Latina is in the business of looking for silver, and obviously the best place in the world to look for silver is where we are, in Mexico. Most silver-endowed country on the earth, has produced more silver than any other country and continues to. An important aspect of the silver production in Mexico is most of that has come out of these great epithermal silver veins. And these silver veins, their location defines the Mexican silver belt. Now, the silver belt can be looked at as a rather diffuse entity. If you take a good look at where you have the really big deposits, you know, something over a billion ounces, the grouping becomes much tighter. It's kind of the same analogy we have with the copper belt in the American Southwest, where the really big deposits define very tight lineaments. And when we plot them in this way, we come up with a tightly defined definition of the silver belt that's about 50 kilometers across and maybe up to 800 meters in length. So that gives you a very tight geographic focus to look in. The other concept you can come at is that most, or virtually all of these great high-grade vein deposits were found in colonial times by the Spaniards. Well, I shouldn't say they were found by the Spaniards. They found for the Spaniards in many cases, not always in nice ways. And these have been mined clear up to the present day. And the history of all these districts has been to grow out and out, and that's where we are today. But any of us who have worked in the silver belt have been struck. As you drive from one district to the other, you go over these big flat areas, and you think, you know, the ones that stick out of the ground, we found them. There have to be some more of these great districts lying under our tires as we drive. And that's where Plata Latina and some of the experience from the San Dimas district came in. So what we did was add to the silver belt the concept of the ore horizon, which we used so successfully in the San Dimas district, and go out looking for these. Now, the concept of the ore horizon has been around for a while. This is the grade 5E publication of Pachuca Real del Monte, and that is one of the initial places where the phenomenon of the ore horizon was first documented. In this case, we have a plan view, and we'll take a look at the longitudinal sections of two. Oops. Does this? No, that doesn't work. I don't know how to get this laser to work. Okay. Well, I am going to need it.
There is no laser.
That makes it easy.
Separate pen.
Oh. Okay. Well, that makes it easy. Okay. I'm doubly dangerous. I've got it in both hands. We're going to look at longitudinal. No, I'm way ahead of myself. Longitudinal sections of the Vizcaína vein and Santa Brígida vein over here in the next slide. As you can see, the ore bodies tend to be long and flat in these veins with some fault offsets. And these show places where you might go to look for more of these just based on the concept. And in the stippled pattern, we see the approximation of what we'd call the ore horizon. Well, in the 5E publication, they did a great thing. They took the elevation or the vertical thickness of these ore horizons on the individual veins and then contoured them. And in doing so, came up with some very well-defined centers of mineralization in the Pachuca Real del Monte district. And they came up with a very reasonable interpretation that these contours were mapping upwelling of the hydrothermal fluids that created all these deposits. And so you can see here's a great district, and it actually had a number of large upwelling areas, which now we call geothermal areas. And it even points to areas where there may be some others that have been downfaulted, which is a very intriguing possibility for the future. Well, from there we pass on to the San Dimas district and a look at the ore horizons there. This is the ore horizon concept. Was first brought to use in the district by Paul Henshaw in the 1950s, revived by Doug Smith to great effect, and continued to be used as a very effective exploration tool in the district to this day. Now, the ore bodies don't look exactly like the flat one. We have a nice ore horizon here, and then this big bump up here. Doug Smith mapped out the limits of quartz veining on the vein. And as you can see, as we have come to know in many of these ore horizon situations, you get the vein, then you get the ore, and then above the vein, you get virtually nothing except some alteration. The thing that's a little different in Tayoltita on the Arana vein is that at the center of the deposit, you have this spike coming up. And it's reflected in the quartz distribution as well. I went back and sub-blocked the ore bodies, calculated the ore ratios, and plotted those. And you can contour the silver-gold ratios in a kind of an interesting way that's very suggestive of a source here and then stuff spreading out from it. In fact, there is an intrusion down here, although it's never been positively identified as a source intrusion. Well, from here we have the concept that, okay, physically you've got this ore horizon. How did it get there? What made it get there? And that's the subject of another study. In my dissertation, I looked at some of the veins in Tayoltita, and looking at the fluid inclusions, it was the temperature of homogenization really didn't show much, except they're all over the place, but they centered around maybe 255, 260. But when we look at the salinities, then something did pop out. And for that, we take a look at where we take the samples. So I sampled some of these places, just as you typically see in so many of these typical epithermal veins, you have barren quartz, and then you have where the ore has really come in, which is along these bands of quartz that include sulfide minerals. And these can be very high grade, and then these will have nothing. And in some places you go, this is all you see. You don't see any values. Well, these do show quite a bit of difference. So when we plot the relative salinities of the samples taken from the two stages of quartz, and the salinities going this way, and then the silver-gold ratio that is around where we took the sample for the fluid inclusion study, at the center of the system, where we had the lowest silver-gold ratios, in other words, the greatest proportion of gold to silver, we had relatively high salinities in the samples that came from the ore quartz, these bands. In the same sample, even though we're in an area that has low silver-gold ratios, in other words, high gold, the salinities are quite low. And then as we go through the deposit, and as we remember the silver-gold ratio zoned outward to higher silver to gold, the salinities decrease, and they eventually merge with this stuff here. In other words, even though when you get out on the fringes of the system, even where you still have some little bands of sulfide or disseminated sulfides, when you are in the high silver to gold, in other words, low proportion of gold, what you're seeing is very similar fluids that are being deposited. One very reasonable explanation of this is that what we're seeing in these systems is at the heart of the system, you have a basic geothermal system chugging along, depositing quartz. It's what we call this ugly, white, barren quartz. From time to time, and this is exactly what you see when you look at the textures, from time to time, During the life of the deposit, you had injected a different fluid, higher salinity, it carried more dissolved stuff. That was carried along in the geothermal system, and as the system boiled, as it diluted, as they mixed, all those processes deposited the high grade. And then as you got towards the fringes of the system, dilution was complete, and all you get is the barren quartz. So we put all these together and we came up with a model. And in that model we have, looking at it in a longitudinal view, you have a rather typical geothermal system chugging along, depositing quartz, and then you have coming into it these fluids with silver and gold and accompanying metals, and they get carried out and they deposit, and then the contours or the of the zoning of the silver and gold, as well as the deposition of quartz, helps map where those fluids were traveling. So in this ideal case, we have it more like the Pachuca model, where it came up and it's low and flat. You can obviously have all kinds of variations on this thing depending on structural conditions and how the plumbing actually worked, but this is rather the most common end member that we see. As the entire system, and when you got below the system, and this is what we saw in the San Dimas district, the veining just disappears. The system really wasn't working along there. In the ore horizon, of course, you get nice quartz vein, banded quartz, just as we saw on the slide, and you get the stuff we're looking for, the ore bodies. Go above it, and as we've seen in so many of these districts, all you see is quartz pyrite alteration. And we've all noticed that a lot of these things, when you get up high up above, you really don't see any geochemical expression. A very good explanation for that comes with this model. The fluids are chugging around here. Generally, they don't even make it to the surface, and that would be why you really, and of course, Mother Nature is never perfectly tidy. You'll get little leakage here and there, sometimes, not always. And in those cases, you will get a bit of an anomaly up here. But for the most part, all you would expect to see up here would be the kinds of elements that are carried in a vapor phase. The obvious one is sulfur. Pyrite is a great alteration mineral. The others, of course, are arsenic, mercury, and, which you would pick up in these areas up here, to the extent they're carried upward in the vapors. So this is the model we've been using, keeping in mind that, as I said, Mother Nature is never exactly tidy. So you're always looking for little things where you could have different things going on. We went out and started looking in the Mexican Silver Belt. And in doing so, well, we were looking in between the old districts, and we staked four properties. The one that we have our first discovery on is the Naranjillo property south of Guanajuato, which of course is one of the great districts, over 1 billion ounces of silver produced, and still going. Just another note on the silver belt and what a linear feature it is in this area. I've plotted the districts along here, and at scale, the principal structures in those districts. You can take a straight edge and go right along there. It's a really marked linear feature. Most of our deposits are in fact right on that linear. So what we're trying to do is mitigate risk, because obviously you can go out and find pyrite altered stuff all over the place. But if you are in this elephant trail, then finding these kinds of alteration have much greater chance of being related to some underlying major deposit. And in fact, that's what's the case, and that's where we had our discovery in Naranjillo. We'll take a closer look at Naranjillo. This is the Guanajuato district up here, Beta Madre. Disappears into this, I guess it's a graben, I'm not absolutely certain. Goes over the hills, and then we pick up where we know there are structures. Now, most of this is known by drilling. We mapped structures on the surface. You really can't see too much other than if you see some lithologic contrast that tell you there's a fault, or in some cases you actually see the structure. So this is the claim group we had. We have some neighbors. This up here is controlled by Fresnillo. And then our good friends at Golden Minerals have this one over here. We started drilling, and the first hole, we didn't know exactly where we were in the system. We had to figure it out, but the first hole did hit about a little less than a half meter of 400 grams silver, even though we had no geochemical expression on the surface. So right away we knew where we had found a buried system. And then on the 8th hole, which is number 10 because 2 holes were lost, we had this discovery up here, which is, let's see if I can read that, almost 11 meters. The true width, estimated true width, is about 6¼ meters, greater than 3 kilos silver, and over 13 grams of gold. Keeping in mind that this is underneath where we had absolutely nothing on the surface. In fact, if we look at the surface, it's what you would expect. All these pastels are the result of some just clay alteration in some tuffs and the oxidation of some accompanying pyrite. Just what you'd expect. You remember, go back to the model. On top of the model, you have the clay pyrite alteration, really nothing in the way of veining, and that's what it looked like here. You can find a few little quartz veinlets here and there, but you just don't see any real veining. Nevertheless, from where this picture is taken, directly under our feet, this is what we found. Classic, banded, high-grade epithermal vein. As I mentioned before, it's about 6¼ meters, estimated true width. Some of the samples in here, obviously, as you always get in these epithermal veins, are very high grade, 17 kilos. We had one that ran 30 kilos. So it was on our first try, I think a very good success at discovering a blind epithermal district, which is basically a new district. It's deep, and we have a neighbor nearby with some deep pockets, and that's the Fresnillo, and they have optioned the property. Many of you may have seen that the press release that came out yesterday where the TSX has approved of the deal, and Fresnillo will embark on a purchase option and exploration of this district. Well, this has been an example of how you can use the ore horizon concept to look for a deep buried deposit coming down from above. And, you know, you get spectacular results. One of the characteristics that comes along with those results is it's deep. And ideally, we would get out and find something that we just don't have to go quite so deep. That's where you can also use the ore horizon concept. And so what we did, we have some other projects in which you use the ore horizon concept, but you look at where you can follow it rather than go for it at depth. And that's our next project, Vaquerias. And let's see, it's right up here. Again, it's right on the silver belt. Up over these hills, we have the Asientos district, and then, of course, going on up to Zacatecas and Fresnillo. Going to the behind us here, we go into the Guanajuato district at some distance. What we're standing on here are post-mineral tuffs, the kind of stuff that you see everywhere. It's what I mentioned before. We drive over it all the time as we drive between these districts. And then an erosional window through the tuffs that itself is also mostly covered with alluvium, but it does have exposures of pre-mineral rocks. And just over here, there's an small old mine that was abandoned about the time of the Revolution, a silver mine. It's a vein that strikes across here and then goes underneath these rhyolites. This is a longitudinal view of the Vaquerias vein. These very old workings. The Consejo got into these in the 1970s, sampled them, came up with some fairly interesting but narrow results. These aren't the only workings. The area in between, we know, we've seen on the surface they have old workings. Those workings are caved in and you can't map them. So you have exposed here old workings. Our first pass drilling was to look underneath these old stopes. And really what we did was we said, okay, there is an ore horizon there and this is the bottom. The best hole we got was right near the bottom of the ore horizon here, where we had over, I think, 4 meters, about 65 grams of silver. Obviously, you drilled up here, you probably get somewhat better results, but that's kind of a small target. So where we're going now is the other use of the ore horizon that I mentioned. And it's a strategy that we used to great effect in the San Dimas district, which is let's just go on the side of the mountain, figure out where we have the ore horizon, and follow it in. Although there we did it with tunneling. In this case, what we plan to do is to come out here with and drill out ahead of these old stopes underneath the post-mineral rhyolite for the continuation of this vein system. And just to see what it looks like in surface, this is a plan view of the project. In the light yellow, we have the post-mineral, mostly rhyolites, or rhyolite tuffs. And then the exposed pre-mineral rocks. Where it's exposed here, it's a wide silicified zone up to maybe 15 meters in width of quartz that varies all the way from jasperoid up to crystalline white quartz with silver values. Where it disappears under the rhyolite, as you can see here, we have exactly the kind of alteration that we're looking for. And so we're going to drill just under the rhyolite here and then come out here and try to follow it out farther. So those are two ways you can use the ore horizon. There are obviously others, especially if you keep in mind that the possible geometries and configurations of ore body distribution within an ore horizon can be quite variable. And so we keep all of these in mind as we carry on with our work. So in summary, what Plata Latina is doing, as we said, we're focusing on the heart of the Mexican silver belt. As I heard somebody say the other day, you hunt for ducks where the ducks are. And as we go along there, we're looking for all opportunities, but we're concentrating on areas where we find windows of pre-mineral rock with signs of mineralization. Then we map and sample it, and then we have to figure out, okay, where are we in a potential ore horizon, if one even exists? Once we get that worked out, then we drill. So that, in a nutshell, is the Plata Latina strategy and the concepts behind it. We've had one, I think, very nice success, and we look forward to some more in the future. And with that, I'll close it. If anybody has any questions.